Welcome to X-Wing Strategy Tips, episode number 2. This episode is going to be all about pilot skill. And I'll tell you a little story. When I first started playing X-Wing, and you look at all the different pilot cards, and you see these ones that have high numbers, like 8s and 9s for pilot skill, and you obviously want them because they must be a better pilot if they have high pilot skill. And then you play 1 or 2 games and get it under your belt and realize, wait, pilot skill doesn't really matter at all. It's about how much firepower I have. And then you start building these really big squadrons with a bunch of TIE fighters and a bunch of ships and just try to go overpower your opponent. And then you run into your first player that uses just a couple pilots with really high pilot skill and flies his ships really well, and you lose the game by losing 8 ships before he loses any. And this is the story of pilot skill. So the moral of this video is that pilot skill is going to matter. And not is it going to matter, it matters a lot. And I've just set up a little situation here. I put a little academy pilot in front of a rookie pilot X-Wing. And let's say they just fired at each other, and maybe they both hit each other even once. And now they're both players are trying to decide what to do next, where to fly their ships. Well, I gotta say, right now, this academy pilot is in a really bad position because of pilot skill. And if you don't understand this concept yet, you're missing a big part of the strategy behind X-Wing. So what a low pilot skill does is it means you're going to fire last and you're going to move first. And that, as you guys may or may not know, that little TIE fighter doesn't really have a good move. The movement options we can look at, you might be looking at this and we'll just say, try to move, a little bit forward. And that way, if the Rebel player moves a little bit forward, he crashes into him. Well, number one, TIE fighters can't move a little bit forward, right? That's just not on their movement dial. So they've got to move quite a bit forward. At least a 2. And this is the sort of the beginner obvious thing to do. And it looks like that TIE fighter will be able to just squeeze in there, I think. Maybe not. But either way, here, if I move the Rebel ship back a little bit, this TIE fighter is still screwed. Because what the Rebel player should notice is that he has a higher pilot skill. And since he has a higher pilot skill, he can move to where the TIE fighter was. And in doing so, he can use his K-turn to flip around. So the Rebel player knows the TIE fighter has to get out of the way first. Rebel player can come in here. I'm just going to eyeball this. Come in here, do the K-turn flip. He does get a stress token, but now look at the situation. We have a TIE fighter being chased by a Rebel player. In this type of setting, you always want to be the person who's doing the chasing, never the person who's being chased. This is a tough situation to get out of if you're the TIE fighter. You do some really nifty flying to get out of it. Or just let the Rebel player fire at you for 1 round, and then try to do your K-turn, but then the problem with that is then you're stressed. The Rebel player may have de-stressed by then, and it's just open season continuously if you try to fight on a head-on fight. So this is a really tough situation to be in. Usually when we have this low pilot skill versus high pilot skill, K-turning with the higher pilot is almost a requisite. It's such a good maneuver. And if you have the lower pilot skill, notice if the pilot's right about here, this TIE fighter can't do his 4 K-turn, right? Just comes up and clips the back of it. Nor can he do his 3 K-turn, right? Because the front of his ship will land right on that Rebel player. So this is why I say that Imperial player here is just screwed and needed a higher pilot skill. All right, here's another really common example of when pilot skill matters. Basically, whenever you're being chased, in general, you always want to be chasing with the higher pilot number. And conversely, if you're being chased and you have the higher pilot skill, it's actually a lot more difficult for your opponent to chase you effectively. Let's see why. So both these players are going to plan their moves, and let's say this TIE fighter tries to just zoom ahead and go 5. Now, if the Rebel player guessed correctly and assumed that TIE fighter was just going to get out of the way, and I think that's out of the camera here, let's move it back. Let's say the TIE fighter only went 4 ahead, maybe 3. If the Rebel player guesses correctly and just goes 2 ahead, we still have the same problem for that TIE fighter, right? Still being chased, nothing good has happened yet. And even if they move 5 and off the screen, they would still be within, range 2 on the firing stick. So still not a great situation to be in. If, on the other hand, we have a TIE fighter chasing a higher pilot skill, let's just flip the two switches around. So notice that the higher pilot is now in the front. This X-Wing player can do something that's, I don't want to call it dirty because they do it all the time. I mean, but it feels dirty the first time you see someone do it. And basically it's a stall. So now we have a higher pilot skill in the back. This rebel player can't necessarily slow play anymore because, well, actually they have to be at least a unit away. If this rebel player just slow plays, right, before he could slow play because the TIE player has to go past him and then he'll just crash into the TIE player and that's fine. But in this case, if he goes forward first, and he has to go forward, right, that's the thing about X-Wing, you can't just stay put. The TIE fighter can now just go 2. In other words, move to where the rebel player just was, and now it's open season on the rookie pilot. So, in other words, if we are moving with a higher pilot skill, we're going to be able to occupy the space that our opponents took. And usually occupying the place where your opponents just were is just, that's what X-Wing is all about, right? Getting that positional advantage, just sort of digging in to where your opponent just was. Sort of following them around gives you a huge advantage in terms of these firing arcs and not being able to get hit. Of course, if you're chasing a Millennium Falcon, you're still going to get hit, but that's a different story altogether. You still want to be able to fire every round that you can, even if you are getting hit. So there's another, so in other words, we're talking about these chase scenes and chasing each other. If you have the higher pilot skill, you're always going to be able to move to where your opponent just was, and that's going to give you an advantage. So if you're carrying long-range targeting weapons like proton torpedoes or concussion missiles, it's also really important that they're on a higher pilot-skilled ship. Let me give you a little demo why this is. So let's say it's the start of the game, the most of the middle of the board is empty, and we have a little TIE Fighter Academy pilot who moves up here. Just gets within range of the camera here, I guess. And then our rebel player moves up. Now, let's say this TIE Fighter, his action was focus. The rebel player's action is going to be target lock. And now he's going to be able to target lock this TIE Fighter and fire off, we'll say, these proton torpedoes. Right now he's within range 3, he's got the target lock, he's just ready to, deliver a big wallop just before they even really engage in firing here. That's great. But what would happen if the pilot skill was reversed? I'm going to sub in a Black Squadron pilot for the Academy pilot. So here, same thing, move our fighters back. This time the rebel has to move first. He goes up, and lo and behold, he's actually not within range 3 of the fighter. So he has to focus instead of target lock. The fighter comes in, and he gets to focus, or even evade, depending on strategy, I guess, but probably focus is more correct here, of course. And they both get a shot at each other. Notice it's not the rebel player wasn't able to fire the proton torpedoes in the first round because he couldn't get the target lock because he moved too early. In other words, his pilot skill was too low. All right, next round of movement. Let's say they go forward again. Here, let's just move the rebel player 1. The rebel's just trying to stay in range 2 as best as possible so he can still get his proton torpedoes off. But now TIE Fighter goes forward 2. And now they're within range 1. And now neither of these weapons, not that he could use the missiles, but you're out of range for the proton torpedoes. In other words, you're too close to fire torpedoes. And now they're both just going to wham each other with their primary guns. So what we've seen here is that, especially when you have a target locking ship, and you want to use it, especially for a secondary weapon, you need it on a higher pilot skill. Because if you're playing against a skilled pilot, or a skilled opponent that is, they're just going to keep their ships out of range, out of range, out of range, and then right up next to you. And if you have a high pilot skill, they don't exactly get to do that because you're going to be able to move after they move and then acquire your target lock. The order of operations here is so important. And one thing that I'm just still impressed by, and in general, Fantasy Flight has some very uneven games that they publish in terms of balancing. This one has been very, very impressive because the costs of these different pilots has really reflected the pilot skill. They've realized that pilot skill makes such a big difference when you actually play the game. That they've really, it seems, almost overvalued. A lot of pilots, if you want a good pilot skill on a pilot, you might pay 5 or 6 more points for that pilot during your squad building than you would on a rookie or an academy pilot. And often it's totally worth it, even though it doesn't seem like it should be. All right, here's another example. We've got the academy pilot back in with our rookie pilot. Although this time I'm going to give the rookie pilot the boost action. And in general, especially when you're playing ships that have boost or even barrel roll, having high pilot skill is so essential because you don't know where you want to end up until your opponent has moved. And so when you have these actions that give you extra movement, you obviously want to let your opponent move first and then decide what you want to do with your ship, which is what the real strength of what these abilities do. Here's a situation. This is one of my favorite, maybe not my favorite, but one of my parts of playing X-Wing that I enjoy probably a little bit more than others. I call this Ring Around the Asteroid. And this tends to happen where you have a ship or a clump of ships. They're all sort of trying to circle each other and catch up to one another. Now, we can even give the Imperial pilot a little bit of an advantage here. Maybe they barrel rolled into a good position here or something. So our X-Wing is behind. But since our X-Wing has boost, there's really not going to be a whole lot that this TIE fighter is going to be able to do about it. For instance, let's say our TIE fighter does a hard 1 turn, right? Again, still playing Ring Around the Asteroid. And our Rebel pilot does hard 2. Let's say that TIE fighter focused. But then we boost with our fighter. And still no one's going to fire at each other this round. But since we knew where the TIE fighter went, we're actually able to catch up in our little Ring Around the Asteroid game. If we go again, say this TIE fighter goes up 2 in a round, we can do kind of the same thing. Let's go 3 this time. Actually, not 3, let's do 2, sorry, with our Rebel player. And then do a 1 boost. We can continue sort of following this TIE fighter. Now, you might say, well, what did high pilot skill have to do with that? Well, let's flip this out. Let's put in our Black Squadron pilots and try to play the same game. Instead of having the Rebel player gradually catch up to our Imperial player, something very different is going to happen. Because in this case, the Rebel player has to move first. And now it becomes a guessing game. It's almost like a bluffing game at this point, because we actually don't know where this pilot is moving yet. So let's play a round or 2 of Ring Around the Asteroid. So we're going to guess there and then go that way. Okay, so we were expecting our TIE fighter to chase us, but since he knows that he has to move first, he has to make us move first, instead he does a K-turn. But we overcommitted to our boost. We moved up too aggressively trying to pursue this guy. And our opponent, gambled a little bit to some degree, but decided that that's what we were most likely to do. And since we didn't know what our opponent was going to be doing, now that TIE fighter, instead of trying to chase us, is actually going to K-turn. And this is a very advantageous situation for the TIE fighter right now. Even though we stressed, our X-Wing is facing the wrong direction. We got to work really hard to get it back into position. So first we have to fly a little bit this way, and maybe we can boost somewhere else, but even if we use our boost action, this TIE fighter is just going to be able to use his actions to pretty easily score some easy hits on us. So in this case, when we turned, if we go back here, or something like this, when we turned, somewhere over here, I don't remember exactly where we were, by boosting, we sort of overcommitted ourselves a little bit, where it'd probably been a little bit better just to take a focus or even a target lock and just slow place the next time in case this TIE fighter came around. On our next round, we could have a heads-up fight, and especially if we took the target lock, this would be much to our benefit as the X-Wing. But since we were committed to boosting and chasing this TIE fighter down before we knew what the TIE fighter was doing, we don't get to make that decision anymore. Similarly, if there are situations in the middle of the board where we just don't know what our opponent is doing, and we have an action like boost or barrel roll, we can see where our opponent does, and we just boost, and maybe sometimes even barrel roll too if you're playing a pilot like Vader, to just get out of the firing arc and be able to hit our opponent without them being able to hit us. It's very glorious and very satisfying, a very fun way to play this game when you're able to just nimbly move your ships. But again, it only works on higher pilots. Don't be putting boost on ships with low pilot skill. They're just gonna be stupid. They're just gonna fly in places where they shouldn't. And if your opponent is any good at predicting where you might boost to, you're gonna get called out on it. So up until this point, I've sort of intentionally left out the 2 most obvious basic reasons for a higher pilot skill, even though most people cite these as being the first 2 that they think of. I just want to save them for the end just to, again, reinforce how I think all those other things we've already listed are actually more important than the 2 most obvious ones. And the 2 most obvious ones for high pilot skill are A, you get to fire first. And if you can blow up a ship, before it fires at you, that means you're saving yourself hits. You're preventing damage. So firing first, don't overlook it. It's still a very, very valid reason for wanting a high pilot skill, but I also want to make it clear it's not the only reason. And then the last reason, again, another basic, obvious reason, is that often you want to see what action your opponents take before you do. You do have a choice of actions every time you move a ship legally without crashing into something else, and sometimes the choices are really easy. For instance, if you're just tailing somebody in a TIE fighter, you're probably going to be focusing. But sometimes the choices are really difficult, especially when it comes to things like boost and barrel roll that we've already noticed, but even just the difference between target lock and focus with an X-Wing. All right, so that's going to be do it for about pilot skill. There are some other reasons for having high pilot skill, some more subtle things that have to do with certain upgrades, but if you can think of your own, please leave it in the comments. And as always, if you want to see more of these, please like this video or even subscribe to the channel. The next video, I want to talk about one particular upgrade card, actually a elite pilot skill card that a lot of my friends really like, and this is my video where I'm just going to tell them that they're wrong for liking it.